Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Four Game Dynamics podcast. My name is John Giuffre. Thank you for tuning in today. This is the show where we think simple, have fun, and get stuff done with Four Game Dynamics. And today we are speaking to Dan Jones. Dan Jones is a hypnotist, an author, a writer, and a really prolific creator on YouTube. There's something a bit special about this episode that I wanted to pop on and do an intro and tell you about first. So, through this interview, we're talking all about hypnosis and how to self-hypnotize so that you can, more effectively change your behaviors and your mindset. And one thing that Dan talks about is he has several guided meditation, guided hypnosis sessions on his YouTube, on his platforms, but he offered to give us a FourGames themed guided hypnosis video. So he's recorded one of those and he sent it to me after we did this interview. And so what we've done is we're uploading it as a separate audio to the podcast and a separate video to YouTube, but it's also attached to this interview. So we'll have the timestamp for that in the description. So if you want, you can listen to the interview up until that point. You can pause there, or you can skip ahead to there and do the meditation or a hypnosis session rather, or you can always go find it as its own resource here on the FourGames YouTube and on the FourGames podcast. So without further ado, I'm really excited to bring you this episode. I want to do another one with Dan as soon as possible. It was really great. I think you guys are going to love it. So without further ado, here is my interview with Dan Jones. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Four Game Dynamics podcast, the show where we think simple, have fun, and get stuff done with Four Game Dynamics. My name's John Giuffre. Thank you for joining me today. Writing co-pilot, we have Alex Martell, the flow designer, as usual. And joining us is another very special guest who I'm really happy to introduce you all to. Today we're speaking to Dan Jones. Dan's joining us from the UK, and he is a hypnotist, a therapist, pretty prolific writer, and he has a really popular YouTube channel that we will have linked down below on all of these subjects. So I met Dan about 2 weeks ago now. I was introduced to him by our first guest, Jamie Combs, and we hit it off, and I'm still kicking myself that we didn't record our first conversation. So anyway, I'm glad to finally be recording this one. Thanks for coming on, Dan.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I guess a good place to start would be, why don't you give a quick elevator pitch in case mine wasn't fully accurate or left some stuff out? What's a quick elevator pitch on you and your work?
That's probably changed a bit over the years, but nowadays I mainly class myself as a content creator. So my background is in, I'm autistic, so I've got that to bring to the table, but I've also worked within the therapy field since the 1990s. And as you mentioned, I'm a bit of a writer. So when I get ideas, I normally think a bit too big and think, yeah, I can do that. How hard could it be? And then try and achieve it. There's nothing wrong with that. But it means that I've achieved a lot of content. I've generated a lot of content. So that's why nowadays, the easiest thing to call myself is a content creator, because most stuff I do, most stuff is online. So most stuff I do is generate content, whether it's e-courses, self-help type videos, or videos training people to do hypnosis or therapy, or writing books. So, but it's all content. So it just, when I'm trying to figure out what bow do I call myself today, that seems to be the one that sums everything up, regardless of what angle people take.
Gotcha. Are you still doing like private practice and therapy and hypnosis work?
Not very often. So I used to teach a hypnotherapy diploma that I wrote, and I taught that from 2007. So I got it accredited with the General Hypnotherapy Register, the General Hypnotherapy Standards Council, which is a UK kind of governing body of hypnotherapy courses, and with the Complementary Natural Health Care Council. I can never remember the full acronym. Who so our government said, we don't want to place restrictions on people who do different forms of therapy. We want you to self-monitor yourselves, and we will just recommend that our doctors and everyone ideally send people to people who we're saying, this sort of private organization is who we're saying oversees stuff. So it doesn't mean that if you go to somebody who's not under that they're bad therapists or anything. It's just that that's kind of who you're under. So I'd got an accredited course that I used to teach from 2007. And then in 2019, I kind of let it all lapse because I'm literally so busy with all the content that I create that to do live trainings, to teach like a whole diploma course across a year is a bit of a stretch, and seeing private clients to try and squeeze in time to do that, I very rarely do it. So I don't advertise at all now for seeing private clients. It's normally as a favor to a friend or something like that, rather than me doing it as kind of a business.
Gotcha. Well, so with a subject like hypnosis, there's a lot of misconceptions. Some people are like, oh, that's like some magical woo-woo stuff, or other people think it's just baseline standard persuasion or sales. So I guess, so we have a working definition. How would you define the hypnosis that you do?
Hypnosis in general is just focusing attention to increase responsiveness. Anything beyond that is people talking complete rubbish. So when people say hypnosis is the alpha state, that's complete rubbish. When people say hypnosis is about relaxation, that's complete rubbish. When people say you've got to use these weird and wonderful techniques, I love some of the weird and wonderful techniques, that's also complete rubbish. So there's lots of ways you can do it, but that isn't it. That's just different ways of getting to the end result. So for example, if you watch a film, so what I mean by responsiveness is not more suggestible. Hypnosis doesn't make people more suggestible statistically. So some people get more suggestible, partly because of placebo. You think you're supposed to be more suggestible, so you are more suggestible. But the flip side is some people become less suggestible because they perhaps don't want to do what they're being told to do. They don't want to be manipulated, so they actually become less suggestible. So hypnosis doesn't increase suggestibility. When people talk about suggestibility, what they mean is this person choosing to follow along to what you're doing, and how accurately are they doing that? So for example, if you were, say, in a stage show kind of environment, if you're asked to pretend to be an astronaut, if you're asked that just normally, like if I just said to you, pretend to be an astronaut, you would put on some act of how to be an astronaut if you were happy to do that. But when you're hypnotized, you essentially act as if you're an astronaut. So that's kind of the different level. You still have to choose to do it, but the difference is when you're just being that role, because you're fully absorbed in it, you do a better job of that role than when you're kind of pretending to do it or partially self-conscious and playing along or whatever. So yeah, when it comes to the responsiveness, I often describe it as if you've ever sat down watching a film and become engaged in the film has hypnotized you. So say you watched a horror film, you're sitting in front of the film, watching the horror film, and you get partway through this film and suddenly you can feel your heart racing because it's a tense moment in the woods. So not about the jump scare bits, but just the sort of the how it's emotionally impacting you makes you kind of feel your heart beginning to speed up, feels you getting tense in your seat. And then even when the film ends, so the responsive part is even when the film ends, you might decide before going to bed, you're going to leave all the lights on tonight. You're going to go, you can normally go to bed perfectly fine, turning all the lights off and just walking in the dark to bed. But you just feel that kind of urge to leave the lights on to go to bed and turn them off when you get to your bedroom, because you've become responsive to the suggestions of being scared and being nervous and what have you. Even though it could be a film from the 1970s, it could be, say, a hammer horror, cheesy film that most of the actors are dead and none of it is real, and yet you still keep all your lights on to go to bed. When you know, logically, consciously, it's actors, they're dead, none of this is real, there's no ghost in your room, there's no vampire standing at the end of your bed. You know all that, but because the film has hypnotized you to experience a certain view of the world, you're still experiencing that when the film has ended. So that is all hypnosis is. It's just that kind of, when I talk about responsiveness, it's having that end result of the person is still following along to the ideas presented, but you've got the same level of control. So with a film, if it's too scary, you can say, oh, stop that, turn that off. You can turn it off and walk away. You don't have to engage in it. But if you choose to carry on engaging with it, then you become increasingly responsive to it. But likewise, they could do something that's so out of left field that it takes you out of the moment. Say really bad, like bats on string or something, that just makes it, oh, that's just stupid, that is. And the same can happen in hypnosis, that if I suggest to somebody that they see a book on a table in front of them, that's perfectly reasonable. Why would you not see a book in front of you on a table? That's a logical place for a book to be. So you could hallucinate a book on a table in front of you because it makes sense in the world that we're creating. If I said hallucinate a dragon in this room with you, for one person, they may think, yeah, my brain is flexible enough, I'll do that. But for most people, it's a step too far unless you've really built up to it through a number of steps. So it's the same sort of thing that, yeah, if you're too outlandish, then the person won't follow the hypnosis, but you can subtly nudge people in a direction.
So what's the mechanism that's at play when someone is going from a state of non-hypnosis into hypnosis? Is there some kind of neurochemical thing going on there?
Not really. So there's no brain state called hypnosis. There's no, what there is though, is the aspects that make up hypnosis can be detected on like an MRI. So the bits to do with focusing attention and responding to stuff, those bits of the brain will obviously light up to say that's what you're doing. People have been hypnotized on exercise bikes to demonstrate that it's nothing to do with relaxation. People have done hypnosis in many different ways to show it's not about specific language patterns. In science, because you always want to replicate stuff and show that it's, these are the results based on this replicated technique or whatever it happens to be, it's nearly always audio recorded or video recorded. So, for example, if you were taking part in a scientific experiment, I would probably be on a computer screen and you would be told, watch Dan on this computer screen and he'll do an induction. And then you would get the same induction that the person after you gets and the person after them gets. And that then gives an idea of when you do this exact thing, you get this exact result. That's where it doesn't translate fully to clinical practice. So when you're with a real client, you can adapt. So like there, you just scratched your nose. So if I was hypnotizing you, the chances are, if I was saying, just take a few moments to focus on me as you begin to drift inside your mind and begin to relax. And while you're doing that, it's okay if you just scratch your nose a moment. It will just help you to relax deeper and get a bit more comfortable. So I would tie that in because it's ongoing behavior. Whereas the audio, the sort of video recorded version of me can't respond to you as a person. So when you work person to person, obviously you literally are very client centered. You can respond to them, you can respond to the breathing, you can watch the person's breathe. It's not so easy on the internet because there's a slight delay in what you can respond to. But you can watch someone's breathing, and as they breathe out, when you've suggested they can begin to relax deeper and deeper or whatever you're suggesting, with the out breath, that's it, all the way. And you can suggest that on the out breath. Most clients don't know what you're doing. So they don't know you've just said that on an out breath. They just suddenly find themselves relaxed. You've suggested relaxation, and when people breathe out, they're relaxing. So they think it's you causing it, but it's not. You just commented on a breath that they were taking anyway. So when you're working one-to-one, obviously you've got significantly more flexibility and you can be far more effective than the scientific research shows, where it's very rigid and it's here is a technique, everyone gets the same, and here's the outcome of that.
So it's about directing people's attention and then they kind of get into feedback loops with themselves, yeah?
Mm.
Okay. So for the record, when you pointed out my nose, I had a very strong urge to scratch my nose a second time, and I was sitting here trying not to smile because I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. Which I'm sure is equally being hypnotized as if I went and scratched my nose again. So I went to very briefly, I went to an art school, and wouldn't financially recommend doing that, but I took an acting class, and we did this exercise called viewpoints, and it was thought of by I believe a woman called Anne Bogart. I might be mistaken there, but the idea was that there are certain elements in, I guess, what you would call like a mid-game space. There's height, there's pace of movement, uh, things like that. There are like 11 of them, 7 or 11 of them. And when an actor is preparing to get into a role, they should manipulate ever so slightly, or at least become aware of each one of those viewpoints, and then try to go into the perspective of what would the character think or want from these viewpoints. And I guess traditionally in acting, there are two schools of thought. There's just say the lines and act like the thing and don't be precious about it. And then there's like this method acting. And method acting can go very far where you're like torturing yourself and like gaining 100 pounds for a role and all kinds of stuff. But the difference is one is like putting on a mask. The other, it seems to be, I guess, like hypnotizing yourself to be like that role. So I guess all that is to beg the question, what would the benefits be to someone hypnotizing themselves or being hypnotized into a certain thing versus the like fake it till you make it, just put on the mask approach?
I think the big difference is it's the difference between conscious and non-conscious. So in case anyone doesn't know what non-conscious is, a lot of people, lay people, talk about unconscious or subconscious, and kind of scientifically, that's not normally what you talk about. So there are unconscious processes that happen, like cell division and a lot of your bodily processes. But most other stuff is either conscious or non-conscious. So that means non-conscious is just not currently in your awareness. And some of that stuff will never be in your awareness or control. But a lot of other stuff comes and goes. So what you did on your 5th birthday may have been non-conscious until your attention is drawn to it, and now it's conscious. So what I would say the main difference is that one is being very conscious of acting a role and doing it with kind of intent, and you're kind of aware of what you're doing. And the other is just doing it non-consciously. You're just being it. So when I talk about therapy, one form of therapy that I do is solution-focused therapy. And I have had to teach lots of people about solution-focused therapy who have trained in solution-focused therapy with other organizations in some of the roles I've had over the years. And one thing I say is that there's a big difference between being solution-focused and doing solution-focused. And a lot of training schools teach you how to do solution-focused, not how to be solution-focused. And that the difference is that when you're doing solution-focused, it's a bunch of techniques and a bunch of questions and a bunch of just telling the person something and hoping to get the right feedback that's going to move them forward. And I've seen people, therapists, say, I've literally formulated this question that when I put it to the client, they're going to transform their lives because the answer to this question is what's going to unlock everything. And then they put the question to the client and the client goes, well, I don't know. Like, well, I don't know where to go from there. I'd literally spent weeks formulating the question and that was supposed to unlock your problem. What do you mean you don't know? I need an answer. So they're just trying to do solution-focused therapy. And the downside to that, so an example is there's a technique in solution-focused therapy called the miracle question. And the miracle question is, if a fairy came into your bedroom overnight, waved a magic wand over your head and granted you the wish that you no longer have your problem, but you don't know this has happened because you're fast asleep. You wake up in the morning, your life is transformed because this fairy's waved this wand over your head. How do you discover? How do you find out? What's the first thing that lets you know your life is different and you've achieved that life that you really want to have? And it's a very good question, and I use it all the time. But if someone has hate written on both their knuckles and you start talking about fairies waving magic wands over their head, it doesn't go down so well with many of those people. So doing solution focus, where you're just following the techniques, doesn't necessarily always work out. Whereas if you're being solution focused, you'll think, right, well, the whole aim of this is to have someone imagining themselves in the future situation where they no longer have the problem. So you just say, if you woke up in the morning and you didn't have the problem anymore, what will be different? You don't just talk about fairies and things. And likewise, doing solution-focused therapy. So there was a case over here, child protection case, where a child died because the social worker was training in solution-focused therapy. And the social worker only asked solution-focused questions of the mum. So when the mum said she had this new boyfriend, the social worker focused on the positives and the strengths and the solutions for that. Like, and what does this boyfriend bring to you? How does this boyfriend help you? And those kind of questions. And the boyfriend killed the child. Whereas what the social worker didn't do was kind of stop for a minute and focus on, who is this man? What's his name? What details can we get about him? Is he a risk to these, your kids? None of that was focused on, because the professional was being solution focused, because they were training in solution focused therapy. Whereas being solution focused rather than doing solution focused, you would say, we're stopping and having a break halfway up this mountain. That's fine. It doesn't matter. You're being solution focused. You're focusing on having a general route up the mountain. We're going to get to the top sometime. But instead of making it that every word you say has to try and make the client take another step, you stop and sit down for a minute. And that's okay. And if they say, things have been a challenge for me, you say, that sounds like it's been really difficult. How have you coped? And so you sit with them for a while. So you're still trying to move towards positives and strengths and moving them forward up that mountain, but you're not kind of forcing them up the mountain. You're not kind of, not battling them up this mountain and essentially dragging them where they aren't ready to go. And so I think that's the same with the acting thing. It's the same with the difference between the conscious, unconscious, like doing something hypnotically versus non-hypnotically, is the difference between, are you just doing something or are you being something? Because they're two very different things. If you're doing parking a car, that's very different to if you're being parking a car. If it's just automatic and you just reverse in, park, and you're done, that's a very different thing to knowing that someone sat next to you, judging every move you make and judging whether you're going to do this correctly. I worked on a documentary years ago about fear. And as part of this documentary, the person sort of told myself and two other people, all you have to do is walk to the camera, and then as you get to the camera, just walk straight past it. That's all the shot we want, is you walking along a beach, and as you reach, just talk to each other, look like you're having small talk. And as you get to, so we were the kind of team of professionals, as you get to the camera, just walk past it nice and naturally. It's surprising how hard walking is when you're told to do it. And you're now focused on the walking. And none of the three of us could walk anymore because we were told to walk naturally towards the camera. And so we're all focusing on, how do you walk naturally? We've learned how to walk naturally, but how do you walk naturally when you're told to walk naturally? So it's the same kind of thing. There's a big difference between just doing something, because you're being it, versus doing something because you're actively trying to analyze every single part of the process of doing it.
So would one of the benefits of hypnosis then be that there, in one of our other interviews, we were talking about how there's so much like frontal lobe activity. We were talking with Joe Kleeman. He runs a physical therapy business, but he's invented something called the cube. And in the cube, imagine you're in, it's a hollow cube about 7 by 7 by 7 feet of PVC piping. And between each pipe are different cords. And on the cords are balls of different colors. You got red, blue, green, whatever. And what you'll do is when you go into the cube, Joe will start with giving you a very simple rule. He'll say, okay, so with your right hand, you're going to touch the red balls. And he'll start layering rules. And eventually after the 10th or 11th rule, you get like the little iMac pinwheel where you're at a RAM and you're just like, I can't do this anymore. And your frontal lobe like breaks because you can't process all the info. And eventually you're just playing in the cube and touching whatever you're touching. And it doesn't matter if you're doing it right. And this is sort of like, it initiates a state of flow by quieting, I don't know if I'm not a neuroscientist, but like quieting the frontal lobe or whatever.
That's kind of the goal of hypnosis. Is so the state that the sort of optimal learning state, which is the state that you would ordinarily, so hypnosis as a thing you're doing. So there's two parts to hypnosis. There's hypnosis, the thing you do, and hypnosis, the thing someone might say, I'm hypnotized. And so the two parts are, the thing you're doing can be in any direction. I could induce anxiety in you, or so a negative state, or I could induce, say, happiness or a positive state or whatever, using hypnotic techniques, because it's about me focusing your attention in a direction, increasing responsiveness to that. So there's a video somewhere out there where I'm sat opposite this guy And I didn't tell him what I was going to do. I just said, are you happy to sit opposite me? And I'm just going to talk at you, essentially. I'm just going to talk at you. And you just have to sort of sit with me. You're okay with that? And he was like, yeah, okay, whatever. And so he sat opposite me, and I'm talking about, well, I'm eliciting uncontrollable laughter. And every time I mention anything in the direction of uncontrollable laughter, I tap him on his knee. But I'm looking him in the face. So he doesn't notice that I tap him on his knee, because people don't pay that much attention to what's going on around them. So he doesn't notice I keep tapping him on his knee every time. I sort of say things like, oh, you know that experience, like when you're in school and you've got like the teacher, like this is in the old days, you've got the teacher scratching on the blackboard, going, writing on the blackboard, and then one of your friends says something funny, but teacher's back to you, and you just feel that overwhelming urge to laugh at what your friend said. And I tap his knee as I say that, but you can't laugh. It'd be so wrong to laugh, and the teacher will tell you off. And the more you try not to laugh, and then I touch his knee again, the more uncontrollable that laugh wants to well up inside you. And I'm talking about all this, and he doesn't know what I'm trying to do. And obviously it ends with me sort of saying, just like that, and touching his knee, and he creases up uncontrollably laughing. And then I touch his knee to link the laughter with the knee, with the touch, and say, and that can happen anytime I do this, as I touch his knee again. And he doesn't realize what I'm doing. So then I've set it up so that anytime in the future I touch his knee and he uncontrollably laughs. I did a similar thing to somebody many years ago who's learning hypnosis, where I linked uncontrollable laughter with touching the back of his hand. And I learned a mistake, because he could trigger it himself, which was very good. But he went to a funeral, and while crying, he touched his hand to his face to wipe his eyes, and he burst out laughing uncontrollably in a church at a funeral, which everyone found funny, including him. He found it very amusing, because people do things like that, weird sort of bizarre behaviors sometimes when you're in that sort of situation. But so you can kind of elicit anything by doing the hypnosis. But what you try and guide someone into when you talk about guiding someone into hypnosis is the optimal learning state, or the flow state. It's that kind of state where they're not putting conscious thought into anything. Things are just happening automatically. They're not. So a hypnotherapist I really like, a guy called Milton Erickson. He was a hypnotist. He was died in 1980. And he always said that if he was traveling along a busy road in the back of a taxi, he would always hypnotize the taxi driver, because he would know that they're going to be paying a lot more attention then to their surroundings, because they'll be focused 100% on just the job of driving, not where do I have to go to pick up next? What do I have to do there? What's going on with my family? They're not focusing on all these distractions. They're just absorbed in the idea of driving. So they do the driving very, very well. And the same with sports people. Sports people have been taught to improve, say, rapid shooting and things like that, by where a target flicks up and you've got to just shoot the target, get as many sort of hits on the targets as you can before the target drops away again, by making it so that, well, they do a few things. One, they do time distortion, so that the target pops up and seems like it was there for ages, so you've got plenty of time to take the shot. The other is they have the person so absorbed in the moment, they're not distracted by anything else. It doesn't matter what goes on around them, they're only absorbed in the process of what they're actually doing. So in my hypnotherapy book, The Introduction to Hypnotherapy, I talk about it and point out the similarities between flow state and what you're trying to elicit when you're doing hypnosis, that kind of state of just things are effortless and you're just in that zone where you can just do what it is you're being asked to do, and you're not putting any conscious thought into doing it. You're not sort of thinking, right, what am I supposed to do now? And you do techniques like, as a hypnotist, you'll create confusion. So you might say, so which of your two hands feel the heaviest right now? And the person might say, on my right hand. So you say, oh, so your right hand, left, right there is feeling heavier than the left hand that's right over there. Is that right? The person, yeah, I think so. And you create a bit of confusion. Okay. And so you create these moments that just essentially shake the person slightly off balance with trying to follow along to what you're doing and saying, so that when you then give direct ideas to them, they latch onto it and they just follow it, because it's sort of easier to do that and to go with the flow and not put conscious thought into it than it is to keep trying to consciously analyze every single thing the person's doing.
Interesting. So it sounds like you get a quick yes from them. So maybe you suggest something that is just obviously the case. Because if they say yes to you, maybe they're not seeing you as a threat or something. Then you confuse them a little bit, and then they'll latch on to what you. Okay.
Yeah, generally one rule of doing something like hypnosis is, I often talk about it as just say what you see. So say things that are essentially undeniable as your first things you say, and then say things that would be hard to deny. So things that, like, for example, if I said to you, you've got many memories of happy times, you may not have, but it's relatively unlikely, even if you were the most negative person, that you don't have memories of happy times. So they're things that I can't prove, but I can be reasonably confident that it's going to be quite accurate, that the person's going to agree to me to some extent. And yeah, the more agreement you get, I often say that the first hypnosis most children learn is the Simon Says. Simon says do this, Simon says do that, Simon says do this, Simon says do that. And then you just say it. And obviously the idea is the person's not supposed to do it unless you say Simon says. So, Simon says stand up, everyone stands up. Simon says sit down, everyone sits down. Simon says lift your right arm, everyone lifts their right arm. Lift your left arm. Those who lift their left arm, they're out. So that's the first kind of example of hypnosis that a lot of people learn without knowing they're learning hypnosis, because you're learning to make it so that you've got all these yeses, all these kind of compliance things, so that when you say the thing that the person isn't obliged to follow, they follow it anyway, because they're so used to following everything that by the time you get to that, it's so automatic and ingrained that if it's not offensive to the person, and it's not like something that jars them and makes them think, hang on, why am I following that? So I might say, you're sat there listening to me, occasionally you nod your head and you blink. And while you blink, you so easily find yourself beginning to breathe in and out. And while you breathe in and out, you can effortlessly just move your head a little and start to want to close those eyes. And you start to make it.
You're not going to make it.
And you make it so that the person ends up feeling incredibly compelled to want to keep following everything, even though they don't actually have an obligation to do it, because it's not offensive and if it's in line with what they're there for as well. So if someone's in therapy for something, sometimes they're forced to be in therapy, like, their partner has said, you've got to go to this therapist and sort yourself out. But most of the time, people are in therapy because they want to on some level. So they engage with the therapy, and they also assume that whatever's going on in therapy is the therapy. So I can start waffling about stories and things, and they'll assume this has got to be somehow relevant to me because this is why I'm here. So if I've got no idea, so Milton Erickson had a case where he had no idea what to do with the client. And so he said nothing to the client. He just asked the client to close their eyes, and he sat there in silence, waited in about sort of 10 minutes. She opened her eyes, and then he sort of said, welcome back. And she was like, I don't remember anything. So that's right, you don't remember anything. You must have said something. That's right, I must have said something, but I don't remember you saying anything. That's right, you really don't remember anything I said. And it just went over and over. And then she got better because she thought something meaningful must have happened that she just has amnesia for. But actually, literally nothing happened because he didn't know what he could do with her. Whoa. So he just did nothing with her and then just fed off the fact that she was confused and thought, you must have done something. You're literally a world famous therapist. You were sat with me. There's got to be something you did here. So anything that you do in a therapy session, the client will assume must be linked to the therapy.
Well, this is something that we spoke about off camera. There was a study where they wanted to figure out the best kind of therapy. So they put all the different schools of thought. They gave them all the same amount of clients with similar problems, whatever, same amount of sessions with them. And what they found was that none of the therapies really outperformed the others to any great degree. What they found was the two factors that made the biggest difference was the individual therapist's rapport and charisma, and then the patient's belief in that therapist or in the method they were using. So it's so much about it's not doing a certain therapy, it's being therapeutic, I guess, to use your earlier example, right? So if someone wanted to, I guess what would be a better place to start? If someone wanted to be more hypnotic or have some of the benefits of hypnosis, I suppose the more responsible place to start would be on themselves. So, what are some circumstances someone might want to try hypnotizing themselves? Is that different really than hypnotizing other people, and how might they do it?
Well, the easiest way to hypnotize yourself is, so a realization, I probably will keep mentioning Milton Erickson because I have a lot of examples from a lot I've read about him and a lot of what I've watched of his, and I like a lot of what he's done. He was in excruciating pain from having polio when he was growing up to then having post-polio syndrome later in his life. He had muscles that had spasmed and ripped off of their bone. So he was always in excruciating pain. And he did a lot of self-hypnosis stuff to try and treat the pain. And he ended up making this realization that the easiest way to treat his pain was just to tell himself, I want to be pain-free by lunchtime, and then just carry on with his life. And then by lunchtime, he'd suddenly realize, oh, I haven't had any pain for a little while, and he would be pain-free. So one realization that he made is that obviously you are a whole being, and as a whole being, it's not like there's two minds. It's not like there's a conscious mind and an unconscious mind. I know that's banded around a lot as if there is, but there isn't. You've got literally one mind, one brain. And so just tell yourself things. There's something in, it's normally taught within social psychology. I'm trying to think of the name of it. Implementation intentions. And the idea is that you essentially say, if this happens, then. So if I feel like scratching an itch or whatever, say you've got a wound or whatever, if I feel like scratching my wound, then I will ignore it. And so you give yourself that implementation intention that if this thing happens, then I will do this other thing. And there was some studies done in relation to studying, in relation to learning stuff. And they found that what makes implementation intentions more effective is the less effort that has to be put into carrying it out. So if, for example, so the actual study was, if there's someone studying, if they're told, if there's a distraction, then you will focus harder on the studying, they're less successful because focusing harder requires effort than someone told, if there's a distraction, then you will ignore it. Because ignoring means don't do anything. It just means carry on like normal. So when you sort of phrase it like that, you have greater success. So part of it comes down to how you phrase it. But when I learned about implementation intentions, I realized how similar that was to Milton Erickson's thing of the most effective self-hypnosis I found was just tell myself what it is I want and by when, and assuming it's reasonable. You're not saying I want to be pain-free in 3 minutes or something. You're giving yourself a bit of time for your brain to send the chemicals around your body and make the necessary changes to have this happen. As long as it's reasonable, just tell yourself and then get on with your life. And as long as it's in line with, so the same with implementation intentions, as long as they're in line with something you want to achieve, so what would be termed a goal intention, as long as they're in line with your goal intentions, they're more likely to then happen automatically. And it creates this automatic behavior, which is very weird. When I read about it, I've got a number of books on the subject, and I wrote about it in my book. When I read about it, the first thing I did was tested it. So I have a habit of, I'm going quite grey now. So I have a habit, the grey hairs are quite coarse. And if I find a grey hair and it's coarse, it irritates me and I end up pulling it out. And so that's not good when I've got a lot of grey hair now. So while I was reading this, I thought, oh, let's give this a quick try. If I feel the urge to pull on a grey hair, then I'll ignore the urge. And then I found that I just stopped pulling out my hair. I didn't put any more effort into it than that. Literally, I was typing my book and I was doing the research for the book while I was typing the book. And I thought, let's give it a go while I'm typing. And it worked. So that, in my opinion, is the easiest way to do self-hypnosis. There are other things you can do. So if You can do mental rehearsal, for example. That's very good under hypnosis. So if it's something where mental rehearsal will be the thing that's helpful, then mental rehearsal is essentially kind of active post-hypnotic suggestion. It's setting something up where you've rehearsed it, and because your brain can't tell the difference between something vividly rehearsed and something real, you can scare yourself just as easily by imagining something scary as you can by being in a situation with the same scary thing. Because your brain responds the same regardless, if you mentally rehearse something, it's as if you've been there and done it before, even though you haven't been there and done it before. So what happens is then when you get to that point in the future, it's more automatic, because it's like, well, I just know what to do here. I've already done this behavior. So you don't have to consciously put the effort into necessarily doing it. It's far more automatic because you've had that period of mentally rehearsing it. So one thing you can do with hypnosis is obviously use the hypnosis part, as I say, to narrow your focus of attention so that you're not distracted by other things, and maybe have it recorded, because then it's easier, because then you can guide yourself just through the audio recording. You can guide yourself through, focus the attention and then say, now you can see yourself. So I always do it dissociated first and then associated. So you can see yourself in that situation, you go through it, and now you say, now restart that. Now imagine stepping into that you on that screen and then go through it again. If I'm doing something, so if I was working with you, I would probably do it physically. So I'd probably have you imagine a circle on the floor behind you, imagine you watching the you do whatever it is you want to learn to do or be able to do in that circle. And then I would say, okay, now restart that and step into that you, feel that, take on that, like say it was confidence, take on that confidence, feel it, so that you're standing in that way, that confident you is in that circle, and then live it out, essentially, go through the motions in the circle. So you don't have to move physically other than getting in the pose that gives you the emotion you want to start that thing. The rest is in your mind, but it just gives you that grounded, you're doing it in reality rather than just sat on a chair for the whole process. So you can do that with hypnosis as well. You can just use the hypnosis to focus attention so you're not distracted by lots of other things, and then do mental rehearsal off the back of that. That's probably my main way of doing therapy as well, is that mixed with storytelling, is having the mental rehearsal so that the person sees themselves doing whatever it is in the future, leading that future life, experiences themselves leading that future life, and then is set up so that when those triggers in reality, so the sort of mid-game triggers happen, they just end up doing all those short game behaviors and thoughts and everything, because the mid-game triggers trigger the short game automatic kind of responding to this environment they found themselves in.
So, okay, so it's great that you brought up those two examples, and I'm sure, as you know, like, two of the things that people would most likely want to be hypnotized about are either overcoming a fear or getting rid of a bad habit or an addiction. And it seems like those things can often be tied at the hip, because if you have an addiction, perhaps you're covering up for some negative thing, and replacing the negative thing with the positive thing might be scary. So I guess an example might be someone eats too much, they're having too much cake, and they're gaining weight, and they know they should go to the gym, but maybe they're scared of looking fat or something at the gym, or looking like they don't know what they're doing. So I guess sort of the traditional basic mindset advice would be, you're just going to say, I'm going to go to the gym and lose weight, and just saying that over and over again. And maybe that doesn't work so well. So it sounds like the correct thing to do is, well, you go, okay, well, I do like cake, but if I feel like eating cake before I go to the gym today, I'm just gonna ignore that. I'm just gonna let that go. You go, okay. And then I'm just gonna think about what going to the gym would be like. Well, what's an exercise that I know I won't look stupid doing? Well, I know I won't look stupid at least walking to the gym. So I'm gonna at least walk there and see how it goes. And if I feel like not walking to the gym, I'm gonna ignore that too. And that's it. And that's a lot more approachable than, all right, you're starting 5x5, go to the Planet Fitness or whatever, you're going to do a bunch of pull-ups for the first time and break your spine, right? Like, okay, would that be like an accurate application of what you just suggested?
Well, with that kind of example, how I would approach it. So I always, when doing sort of therapy stuff, coaching stuff, anything like that, would kind of go to the long game bit first. What's that kind of end goal you want to achieve? And then obviously you drag all the short game stuff down there and the mid game stuff down. What's that end result you want? What will you be thinking in that end result? What will you be feeling in that end result? What will you be doing in that end result? So you sort of essentially create that kind of, this is who you are if that end result was happening right now. And then you start, so to make it more effective, you start talking as if, so I always talk as if things are possible. So I use when and will rather than what would it be like, because would implies it might not be. Whereas what will it be like? It just assumes that it's going to happen. So people don't normally consciously pick up on that subtle difference, but it makes a huge difference in terms of the therapy. Then I want to know, what's the environment like in that sort of future, the sort of long game end of the road bit? What's the environment like? Who's around you? What's your setup? Like, do you jump in a car or do you walk or jump on a bike or whatever? What are the sort of things around you that's going to help you to have this new life? When you've got this life, what is that? What does that look like? Not just within you, but outside of you as well. What is your life? So I want to know all of that stuff, because obviously you want the client to essentially have that as if it's real, as if it's a real solid, I can imagine waking up and that is the life I would have. So you don't want the knots. You don't want what the person doesn't want. You don't want the person to be saying, I wouldn't be fat. I wouldn't be doing this. I wouldn't be doing that, because that doesn't tell you what they would be doing. It doesn't give you any information about the actual life they will be leading. What I want to know is, if I came up to you in the street and said, oh, you've achieved your goal, how are things now? What are you going to tell me? I don't want to know what you don't have anymore. I just want to know what that life is. So I'll do all that. And I always do scaling. So I always sort of say, okay, let's assume that's a 10. You've hit your end goal. Everything is absolutely perfect. How much of that would you be happy with if it wasn't 100% perfect? So what you don't want is people to say it has to be all or nothing. You don't want people to be in a position. So you kind of want to identify that and deal with that early. You don't want someone to say, I've got to have this reality, or I failed. And if I failed, I'm going to just go back to eating cake again. So you don't want that. You want them to kind of be in that position where they say, if I suddenly lose my job and this bad thing happens and I end up finding myself just eating a lot of cake for a week, well, that would make me like a 9 out of 10 rather than a 10 out of 10. As long as I know after that week, after I've got over that, thought, oh, that was stupid, I can get back on to carrying on with my life that I want to have. So you establish kind of, how much of it going wrong are you happy to accept to still think, yeah, that's good. I like that, I'm happy with this. So like with a smoker, it could be, if a family member died and someone offered me a cigarette and I had that cigarette, I would never have been able to plan that that's how I'd respond. But if I had a cigarette under that circumstance and then didn't have one again, well, it's not the end of the world. So you want someone to have kind of a healthy relationship with the outcome they want to have. The same with, like, if I said as a YouTuber, I want to have this many subscribers or whatever, which is out of my control anyway. But if I said something like that, the question is, well, how much would you be happy with if you didn't get to that kind of thing? So you want to know that the person isn't going to be, it's all this or nothing. And then I want to work my way back, 0 to 10. Where are you now? Say 3. Okay, what does that look like? So I want the short game of that. What sort of things you're doing in your head? How are you behaving? What's your environment around you? What sort of the mid-game stuff? What is your lived experience that says you're a 3? Why not a 2? Why not a 4? What makes you a 3? And then I want to know what a 4 is, because that's our next step. If I can make any of that 4 happen for them, or help them to make it happen for themselves, you've just made them a 4. And it could sometimes be something really stupidly easy that they haven't thought about before that could change everything. So it could be, using the going to the gym example, it could be literally, if I can just go out the house once and walk to the end of the street, that will give me the confidence that I know I can leave the house and not just feel ashamed of leaving the house. So it could be, even by the end of the session, I would say, let's just pop outside. Let's walk down the road and do that right there and then. And then, so you start filling in some of those numbers in the middle, just so you know. And the other important number is, at what point do you never need to see me again? Because the role of any therapist or coach is to never have to see the client ever again. That is 100% your role. Is no one should be reliant on you as a therapist or a coach. People should be self-reliant. Your role is to help people to become self-reliant. So you want to know, at what point on this journey don't you need me? So with the weight loss kind of example, it could be, once I've got my routine going, they're not going to have lost more than maybe a couple of pounds of weight across, say, a few weeks or whatever. But once I've got my routine going, I don't think I'd probably need to see you again, because I can carry on doing my routine. I won't have lost much weight, but I don't need to come and pay money to see you every single week while I'm doing the thing that I've already been doing every week. I'll just carry on with my life. And if I need you, because I fall off the wagon a bit somewhere along the line, I'll get in touch. But that's the point. So they might say, 4 out of 10 or something. If I hit that, that means my routine's in place. It means I'm going, to the gym, I'm going walking, whatever it happens to be. It means I don't need you for the rest of my journey. So you sort of establish all that. So that's kind of how I approach it. And then when I'm doing the long game stuff, I always, as I say, do the mental rehearsal. I kind of drum that all in there so that they've seen themselves doing it all, then kind of experience themselves doing it all. And then the idea is you just want them to start doing it. And I normally throw in tons of stories as well. Obviously, storytelling is one of the oldest forms of hypnosis. Just saying to somebody, once upon a time, people are kind of hardwired because of childhood to go and just drift into their mind. So that's literally one of the easiest ways to hypnotize people. Just start telling a story and people will be hopefully hanging on your words and engaging in that story. So I will take their metaphors that they've given me and I will use those metaphors therapeutically for them. So if, say, the weight loss one, if they said, but it's like overwhelming. It's like I've got a mountain in front of me and I've got no way of getting to the other side. I may then create a story that includes a metaphor of having a mountain that they either climb over, they struggle, but they get to the top, they look at how far they've come, they look over, say, a forest that's below and across the rivers that are, sunlight glinting on them or whatever. And then they go down the other side and they discover the land on the other side. Maybe they find a way of tunneling through. Whatever it happens to be based on what they've told me, I would then turn those into some kind of a tale for them that's very meaningful for them as an individual, because it's using all their metaphors. It's using what they have told me, not me coming up with something and imposing it upon them. It's taking all the stuff that's essentially symbolic of who they are, sort of inside themselves, and just feeding that back. So, this is kind of the stuff that's who they are as a being. That's how they represent the world on that larger kind of level.
One thing I was going to ask that you started touching on there is about deep game. So we've mentioned the other 3 games in relation to self-hypnosis. Perhaps an example might be, maybe it'd be very common with, sexual stuff. Most religions have certain rules or belief systems in place around sexuality. So if someone's dealing with something about that, maybe the short, mid, and long game is all lined up. They want to do this, but maybe they feel a certain thing from their religious upbringing or their philosophy or their politics or something like that. Something in their deep game is telling them no, or you have to be this way. Is it the role of a hypnotist to interfere with that, or is it the role to say how can we fit what they want to accomplish within their moral or metaphysical framework?
I would always be guided by the client. So if they 100% said, I want to hang on to all my current beliefs about the world and how I feel that I should kind of engage in the world, which is largely a bunch of rules that someone down the street could have exactly the same, say, religious belief, but not have any of those rules because of how they've been brought up, perhaps, and their perspective on the faith or whatever it happens to be. So it isn't technically ever about the religion. It's, because everyone has, there's, for example, a lot of Christians out there, but some are very happy, say, with LGBTQ plus community, others are very anti that. So it isn't specifically about the sort of the religion at the top of it all. It's the relationship with that that a lot of that is learned, like how the perspectives they've learned through their upbringing and their, what they've been taught is right or wrong in relation to that. So some of that is not my place to enforce my views on anyone. So I had a therapist years and years and years, a very long time ago now. I was sat in his car with him. We were driving somewhere and we were talking about therapy, and he said, what if a smoker came to you, a depressed smoker came to you? What would you do with them? I said, well, what do they want help with? And he said, say they wanted help with depression. I said, well, then I'd help them with the depression. He said, but they're still a smoker, so they shouldn't leave therapy. I said, but they haven't asked for help with the therapy. I don't think people should smoke. I think that I'd prefer people not to. But who am I to impose my views and beliefs upon a client and say, I don't believe that smoking is good, so you must stop it and you can't leave therapy until you do. So, and they totally disagreed. They said in therapy, people should stay in therapy until they are fully fixed, whatever that means. And fully fixed is always what that therapist thinks fully fixed means, which they might not think they're broken. So, so that would be my sort of take on it, would be that I wouldn't impose my views upon the person. I'd always be led by them. But obviously, if they wanted to lead a certain lifestyle, then I would be working on how best to help them to reconcile, or give them a space to reconcile that conflict. And it could be, and it most likely would be, that would be something that they would have some kind of a moment at some point in their future where, like when people go from being really religious to, say, becoming an atheist. So I'm not saying the person would necessarily become an atheist, but you get people that are really religious one minute and then they gradually have certain things that happen that make them kind of think, well, I'm not so happy with that. That doesn't seem to match up with this. And gradually they just find their own path out. So I would be more inclined to try and, if that's what they say they want, to help to sort of set up with them the ideas of that path out based on what they're telling me and how our conversation goes, and begin to formulate within them, who do you want to be remembered as? So kind of the new deep game, so to speak. What do you want your legacy to be? Who do you want to be remembered as? What are the stories that you would love, you sort of tell about yourself, about who you are, how you are? I would explore all that, but ultimately leave it up to them to find their path from the one they're at to the one we've kind of created, and it's sitting there ready. So I remember a therapist saying years ago, when people have better options for doing something, they normally take the better option. They don't normally necessarily do it straight away, but they normally find that better option. So if someone smokes to relax, for example, normally once they know alternative ways of relaxing, like say they've learned yoga or they've learned relaxation techniques, breathing techniques, whatever it happens to be, once they learn things that are just as easy as going and having a cigarette, you don't necessarily tell them to stop smoking. They can naturally find their way, where they find that there are sometimes they're just stressed and they can't go for a cigarette. So they breathe at their desk or whatever, they're in work and they breathe at their desk. And it just becomes something that's a part of their life and it's easy. And so they then stop smoking, not because someone told them to, but because they take the path of least resistance. This new way of being is actually relatively straightforward. So why not keep doing it? And so you just start doing it more and more until that becomes your new reality, where you just don't do the old behavior anymore. So that's kind of the approach that I would take, that I would set it all up. What is it you would like? How would you like to be? Set up that reality, that new kind of deep game model that they would like, that's in line with their long game, that sort of what they want to achieve, which is obviously all filled with the mid game of how they want their environment to be, which also might not include some of the people or the things that were making up the old one. Like say, you sort of mentioned sexuality, say it was to do with sexuality in some way, that might mean having to exclude or not spend a lot of time around certain people because of the, say, negative impact of those people on you as a person. So you've already explored that as a possibility for how, for that new mid game. And so you've got, I'd have these new thoughts, these new feelings, these new behaviors, this new environment. I'd have this goal that I want, and I would have to take on these new beliefs at some point if I'm to maintain this and keep this reality going. So the role of a therapist is really to tip as few dominoes as you need to make the rest fall down. So the smallest change you can make in the right direction is the role of a therapist or a coach. It's not to do everything for a client. There was Milton Erickson, again, wrote an article in, I think, the 1960s, like 1964, called The Burden of Effective Psychotherapy or something like that. And it was all about how therapists take on the burden of what the client is supposed to do. Therapists, I've got to make them better. I've got to fix them. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. When actually your role isn't to do the work for the client. Your role is to support the client to do the work. And so you've got to perhaps work on helping them to be motivated to do it. You know, there's bits you've got to do that are your speciality, but they're the one that has to live their life. They're the one that's going to have to go on beyond therapy. They're the one that has to do the work. And so the smaller bit you can do to nudge them to start making those changes, the better. You don't want them to rely on you. You don't want to put, say, 3 years of your time into changing a client's behavior, where the client says, it's only because of 3 years of solid therapy that I'm this person I am now. And then when they have another problem, they think, I've got to go for another 3 years of therapy. You want to say, I saw you for 3 or 4 sessions and you've done the rest yourself. And sometimes that can just be setting a task that's a bit perhaps illogical, which is something I do a lot of, saying things that seem illogical, but they're totally logical to me in my brain. They just seem illogical to others. Like a guy that said, I'm going to tell you the same as I told. So we used to have an NHS quit smoking team that would help people to stop smoking. Because obviously, if you can stop people smoking, it's less cost to healthcare. And so that's what the role of this team was. And he said, I'm going to tell you the same as I told the NHS nurse that referred me to you. I could have you smoking 40 a day before you can stop me smoking 40 a day. I'm only here because I've been told to be here. You will not stop me smoking. So it's like, well, okay, you clearly don't want to get better. So I said, you're probably correct. There's probably no way I can stop you smoking. If you want to smoke, that's 100% your choice. But you've been told to come here. You've obviously agreed to come here to shut everyone up. So while you're here, we may as well spend this time talking about stuff. Tell me some of the times you smoke. And one of the times he said, I smoke when I go to the supermarket. He said, I smoke 2 cigarettes on the journey to the supermarket, 2 cigarettes when I'm sat in the car park, because I know I can't smoke in the supermarket, 2 cigarettes when I come out of the supermarket before I set off, because I haven't smoked for like an hour because I've been in the supermarket buying my food shopping, and then 2 cigarettes on my journey home. And I said, would you be willing, just to, because I'm curious, to smoke 4 cigarettes when you're in the car park? So don't smoke the 2 on the way to the supermarket. Just when you arrive, smoke all 4 cigarettes. And then when you get out the supermarket, smoke another 4. Would you be willing to do that? So you smoke the same number, it's just you're doing it all in one lump. And he was like, okay, I suppose I would do that. And he did it, and he hated me very, very much because he stopped smoking. Because it became a burden. He was sat in the supermarket, I just want to go and get the shopping over and done with. I hate shopping, and I've got to smoke these cigarettes before I can go in there. And he found it such a chore having to smoke 4 cigarettes before going in and 4 cigarettes when he came out, that he quit smoking. And when I bumped into his daughter, because he never came back for another session, his daughter laughed and said he stopped smoking, and he really, really hates you for it because he thinks you've manipulated him. But he didn't have to follow anything I said. He voluntarily chose to do that, but it stopped him smoking. I've done things to help people stop drinking where I've told them to drink alcohol as a way of stopping them drinking. So one guy, I said, he said, I leave my flat, I cycle down to the corner shop, I buy a bottle of vodka, I cycle home, I drink the bottle of vodka, pass out, come to, cycle back down to the shop, buy another bottle of vodka, and then just keep repeating that. Shop's closed, next morning, start again. I said, but the pub's closer than the shop. Why don't you go to the pub? That's stupid that you're going all that distance before you have your alcohol. Would you agree to go to the pub instead and drink, just line up, say 4 pints of beer on the side and 4 shots, gulp back the beers as fast as you can, gulp back the shots. After each one, say that bloody and just swear about me and say how much you hate me. Gulp back each one and then go home. And if you want to go out and get your vodka, then go back out and get your vodka. He was like, okay, you're telling me to drink, I'll do it. And he did it. And again, he quit because he felt so sick after gulping back pints that he couldn't go to the shop because he felt too sick, but he wasn't as drunk. And so it just broke his pattern. It broke the pattern that he had established of, he had this pattern of how he behaved, this specific routine. It broke that pattern, broke the routine. And the same person, I told him, I see you got plants on outside your flat on your sort of balcony bit. It'd be a shame that they look like they're dying. It'd be a shame to let them die. When I come round, I'd like to see them looked after. And so again, I had him look after his plants as part of the therapy, so that he was having to give his time to looking after something, paying attention to something other than himself, and start to just change his associations with things around him. And that's what stopped him kind of drinking and kept him sober. So I'll often kind of find things that are simple solutions, as far as I see them, that I'll set as tasks or whatever, that others don't necessarily always think of.
Well, it's interesting because you're looking at it like a system. You're understanding there's an agent who has free will here, and they're choosing to do something that might not, maybe they don't really want to do that, or it's not good for them. They can't, it's not just an A to B thing though. You have to go, okay, well, what environment are they in when they're making that choice? What are the feedback loops? What's the reward? So it's interesting because, like, on one hand, like Jocko Willink has this advice where if you're losing weight, you're on a diet, but you get a craving for, the ice cream or something. Well, he says, okay, well, the ice cream's not bad, but giving up on your discipline would be a problem. So what you do is you say, okay, I really want ice cream. If I still want ice cream tomorrow, I will let myself have an ice cream, but today I'm not going to do that. And then tomorrow you can have the ice cream, and oftentimes people won't, because the craving is no longer there. So in that case, it's about, well, we want to give positive reinforcement to discipline. It's not about the ice cream at all. In other scenarios, I've seen like Dave Asprey or Tim Ferriss recommend for that same thing around dieting, schedule a cheat day. Tim Ferriss does it once a week, which might be too much to have the physiological benefits. Dave Asprey only does it for Christmas, which is maybe not often enough to get the happiness out of it, I guess. But they're like, write down every single thing that you shouldn't eat. And on the cheat day, eat all of it. Go out and buy all of it. Go buy 12 croissants and an ice cream pie and have all of it, and enjoy it while you're having it, because about 20 minutes later, you're going to feel like shit and you're not going to want to eat that way. So in that case, it's about similar to the go to the bar and drink it all at once, because you're starting to associate like a dog with a shock collar, like a negative response to the thing that you like. So it's interesting how there's a meta element to, it's not about you and the food, it's about your feedback loops and your psychological processes, and whether you're having positive or negative associations.
Yeah, one very important thing is just finding that point where you can break a pattern. So we essentially are pattern matching machines. We run our lives through patterns. And if you can break that pattern, especially if you can break it with the easiest, the smallest possible point. So it's a bit like, spitting in someone's soup. Well, the rest of the soup's fine, isn't it? It's like, yeah, but I'm not going to eat it. So, you can make a small change to something and completely spoil the old pattern or the way that it used to play out. So you can do, for example, for sleep. When I used to work with teenagers, I would say to the teenagers, so I used to work in children's homes, and I'd say to the teenagers, look, I'll give you £5 if you stay awake all night. And they'll be asleep in like 2 hours, because now they're going to force themselves to try and stay awake. And the harder you try to do something like stay awake, the more you're thinking, don't fall asleep, don't fall asleep, don't, and the faster you fall asleep. So most of us have experienced this in life because it's the stupid way our brain works. I want to watch that program at midnight. Obviously nowadays you can just stream everything whenever you want. But in the olden days, you want to watch a program that's on at a fixed time. You had no other way of watching it. So you go, I want to watch that program at midnight, that film at midnight. And at 10 to 12, you fall asleep. Or I've got to get up at 6 a.m. So I'm going to go to bed at 10. At 12 o'clock, you're wide awake and still not asleep. because that's the way our brain works. So by telling, so when a teenager is misbehaving and I'm not going to go to bed, I'm not going to go to bed, I'm not going to go to bed. Okay, stay up all night and I'll give you a £5. Why argue with it? Why give them? So for any conflict to happen, you have to have the other side of the conflict. Why give them the other side of the conflict when you can seem to be giving them what they want? And that's actually kind of almost secretly, sneakily, almost like a ninja way of, secretly coming in to stop them doing something. A bit like I told you about the person who wanted to beat me up, and I gave them a cricket bat. And it was the most logical thing in the world. I'm standing in a dining room. I had a wall down the side of me here with a window on it and low ceiling, not far above my head. Dining room table the other side of me, cricket bat leaning against the wall beside me. Person comes running in, really aggressive, wanting to beat me up. I pick up the cricket bat, say, here, use this. It was the most logical way to deal with the conflict, because my main goal was it makes him stupidly predictable. I didn't know if he was going to punch me, kick me, bite me, headbutt me, knee me, elbow me, grab something else in the room that I haven't noticed and hit me with that. There's a lot of things he could have done. But once you give someone a weapon, they want to use the weapon. So as soon as I gave him the cricket bat, I was very confident if he wanted to hit me, he's going to use the bat now and he's going to try and swing it. But you've got a ceiling here, a wall there. He can only swing one way and he can't swing it high. So I know exactly where it's going to come from if he decides to hit me with it. And so I can defend myself against it because I've made him stupidly predictable. As it was, he put it down on the dining room table, told me I was crazy and walked off calmly. So it worked even better than I planned. But my plan was, let's make him predictable so that this is really easy to handle. Let's just change the pattern here. And that's often all you're trying to do, is change patterns in things by making small little changes to things. So an example is another Milton Erickson example. Someone went to him and they were smoking. Another therapist went to him for training and they were smoking. And he said, I'm really curious about how you're smoking. Are you putting it like in the front there? Or are you having it in the left side or the right side? Where are you putting the cigarette when you go and take a drag? And the guy's like, I don't know, I have no idea. I don't really pay that much attention to it. So I'm just really curious about these things. And how long do you breathe in for when you're taking a drag? How long do you do that for? And he was just overanalyzing the smoking. And then the guy found it so awkward to smoke. Now he'd had all his conscious attention drawn to every tiny little aspect of the process of smoking. He could no longer smoke. And so he quit. He was never told that he was going to be made to stop smoking. But as a therapist who was going to Milton Erickson to learn how to do therapy, that was his first lesson, is not having you coming here and smoking. You're going to stop that. And he was made to stop smoking by just overanalyzing the cigarettes.
I've seen that work with comedians if they're getting heckled, because a lot of times the temptation is some comedians will lose their cool and they'll just yell at the guy. Another approach that works pretty well is, someone comes at you and you're on stage, you just like make fun of them and shut them down and they're not funnier than you and whatever. But I've seen some comics when I think there was a really great scene in Louis C.K.'s sitcom where he's being heckled by a girl and he just like overanalyzes what he's like, oh, so you're sitting here with your friends and do you think you're gonna like look cooler in front of your friends? I have a question. Do you see how many other people there are in this room? Did you think about all of them when you decided to ruin the show? Or is there one of them that's making you like mad and you wanted to ruin it for them? And it just like runs through every possible thing. And like the character gets so sad, it just shuts down. So it's interesting, like the applications there. So I want to be respectful of your time. If you have maybe 5, or I also want to give you a chance to plug all your books and your YouTube channel, but as one last kind of story, you referenced, but didn't tell me the full story of a time where you hypnotized your friend to live a lifetime in just 5 minutes. And I'm wondering why you did that, what his life was, I guess, in those 5 minutes and what the results were.
The life was relatively boring. It was a relatively mundane, normal life that he led, which is probably a nice thing. But yeah, I was young. He was younger. I was around his and we were chatting about things and chatting about life. And I think I was like maybe 21 or something. He was 18, 19, something like that, 17, something. And he said, I'd love to know what it'd be like to live a long life through to old age. I'd just love to know that. You know, I'm young, and he was curious. He also was very willing to engage with me on all these hypnotic things. He was always my go-to person whenever I had an idea. So we would do all sorts of stupid things. So like, for example, one day I said, I've never given someone like, you know, made their hand numb or anything and stabbed them. I'd love to give that a go. He's like, no, I'm up for that. Give that a go. So, okay, fair enough. Willing volunteer. So there's me with a needle and a lighter. I'll just prepare this. This lighter, just get rid of some of the soot from this, just wave a lighter over it. And then I hypnotize him and numb his hand, and I'm there kind of, he's looking at his hand and I'm there sort of, he's pinching his hand and sort of lifting his skin, and I'm sort of ramming this needle through his hand to try and get it through. Like, you've got to push harder, it's not going through. And I was sort of, you know, stabbing him in the hand. And so he was really willing to do anything. We did some stuff about future progression, and we had weird results with that though, but we went to the future and saw what the future was like, and I logged everything down, and it then happened. That was the weird part. We went and did past life regression stuff. But yeah, one time he said, I'd love to just know what a life is like. And he since ended up having kids, but at that point he was literally just a teenager. And so I hypnotized him, and you can do time distortion with hypnosis. So I said, you'll lead an entire lifetime over the next 5 minutes or so. I then went off, made a cup of tea for each of us, brought it back, put them down on the table, sat there waiting just a couple more minutes until he just naturally opened his eyes, came back to the room, and then we just sat for hours and hours and hours talking about what that life was like, what it was like to have kids and watch your kids grow up and have your kids go to school, go to university, get married, some of the challenges of these things, your kids visiting you when you're getting older, and literally we just chatted for hours and hours and hours about this life he had just experienced. And for him, it was obviously an incredibly profound experience to go through that, and then us being able to talk for so long about something that he'd only had his eyes shut for 5 minutes for, which is one of the advantages. Milton Erickson wrote a book, Time Distortion in Hypnosis, and he talks about some of the sort of scientific experiments with hypnosis and time distortion that he did. And it would be things like, to help people lose weight, he would do time distortion so that it feels like their hand is moving to their mouth so incredibly slowly, even though they're eating at a normal speed. It feels like the hand's moving so slowly to their mouth that eating a plate of food feels like you've just sat there for 3 or 4 hours to eat it. And the person would get so bored of eating that they wouldn't eat the full plate. For things like reading, he would do it so that if you're studying, you would read as if you would feel like you're reading in real time, just normally turn the pages when you get to the end of a page, nice leisurely reading. But he would make it so that time is sped up for you, so that in reality, so as an observer, you're watching the person just flick these pages over rapidly. But to you, you're just leisurely, slowly reading through the book as a way of like using time distortion to make it so you can learn much faster. So there's all these kind of, with the same friend, I did time distortion to help him to improve his singing range. I kind of thought, oh, let's do a multiverse type technique. So I hypnotized him and then said, you're going to walk into a studio. And as you open the door and walk into the studio, it's going to become an infinite number of studios and an infinite number of you walking into that studio. And then as soon as you've learned the lessons you have to learn in that studio and you've mastered improving your range, your singing range, you're then going to open the door on the other side of the studio and you're going to walk out simultaneously in every universe. And you're going to come out back into the one universe, and then you'll open your eyes. And I said, it's going to take as long as it takes for you to learn this internally, but externally, there's only going to be 1 minute. And so again, he felt like he was in that state for a stupidly long time, and a bit trippy because he kind of had this weird multiverse type trippy mind going on. And then he exited with a really sore throat and an improved range for singing.
Do you have do you have like a YouTube video where you have like a prompt or a pre-recorded hypnosis for one of these like time distortion things? That's
I think I've probably got some time distortion ones. I don't have anything more elaborate than that uploaded. I used to, so I've been on YouTube for a very, very long time. And when I started on YouTube, I used to literally just upload hundreds of videos of self-hypnosis tracks, demonstrations of me doing different things with different people to demonstrate lots of different types of techniques and, you know, different responses that I would get with people. And then because of trolling, I ended up from the community, I ended up deleting nearly all of it off of YouTube. Nowadays, compared to what goes out nowadays, none of it is of a high enough quality for me to re-upload it. Some of it I have redone. So some of it I've literally, which is also very trippy, put a headphone in, listening to the recording that I'd done that's old, that's got like the buzz on it and all the rest of it, because it was recorded, a lot of it was recorded between like 2000 and 2005-ish, where I was recording it straight into my computer. So it has the horrible zzz on it.
yeah.
And never mind how much I try and clean it up, it can't be cleaned up. It's really bad audio. So what I would do is put the headphone in, listen to the old audio while recording into one of my microphones somewhere, recording a whole new audio that I'm listening to, almost word for word of what I'm listening to in real time. So, you know, my ear, it would be sort of saying, okay, just take a moment to close your eyes and begin to relax. And then I'd be saying, okay, just take a moment to close your eyes. And it's really weird and really trippy, but to try and hear hypnosis going in your ear and then say what you're hearing as you're doing that is not easy. But yeah, I've done that with a couple of tracks to try and put better quality ones out there without having to kind of totally redo it just off the top of my head.
I'd be very intrigued to try any of these, but particularly the time distortion ones seem very, very interesting to me. I don't know if this is something you'd be interested in, and if you're not, and this isn't appropriate to ask, then I'll just cut this. But if you have a hypnosis that either you already have uploaded or one that you think could be uploaded, it might be interesting to add one to the end of this episode if people are interested in trying it out. You're listening to this, you learned how it works, and you could just try it right now. Would that be something you're interested in doing?
Probably. It probably wouldn't be too difficult to do either. And I've even in the past, so I don't know if I'd have time to do it again, but in the past, I've done like, you know, 4-game type hypnosis, taking people through the 4 games as a way of like guiding them through. So kind of a generic thing that's I'm talking vague so that the person can fill in the blanks almost. So I'll talk about, you know, that long game thing and you picturing yourself in that situation, and I'll be vague in my words so that you can fill in the blanks, the specifics. I'm just guiding your attention. So that's a technique I do a lot on things. So for example, with my stories, I generally like to have people have the experience they want to have, not the experience I make them have. So I might, for example, say to you, imagine yourself walking along a beach. And as you're walking along that beach, I wonder what the ground's like. So I don't tell you it's a stony ground, it's a pebbly ground, it's white sand, golden sand, black sand. I don't tell you what the beach is. I draw your attention to the beach so that you internally can pay attention to what it is. I don't need to know that. All I need to know is that I'm guiding your attention to it. And then I might say, I wonder what sort of day it is, whether it's sunny, whether there are some clouds. Just gaze up at the sky and just notice. So I'm guiding your attention to look. I'm not telling you what to see. And so I'll do that as a way of me focusing your attention, but not dictating to you what you have to have as your experience. And some people don't like that when it's a generic thing, because it can become too generic, and some people just want to be told what to do and how to think and how to feel, and they don't want it that vague. But then other people find it reassuring, because there's nothing worse for some people than imagine yourself on a beach, and as you walk along that beach, just notice the golden sand. And the time between me saying, imagine yourself on a beach, you're now thinking of yourself walking on, say, a pebbly beach. And then I say, just noticing that golden sand, you now have to totally transform everything you've been thinking of that beach you've automatically created to do the one I've just told you it has to now be. So when I do introduce something into someone's experience, I normally do it vaguely first. So say, imagine yourself walking through the woods, and as you walk through the woods, I wonder at what point you'll notice that stream in the distance. And so I know I want the stream, so I'll introduce it as, when you're going to notice it. It's there. It's now just a question of when you're going to notice it. So if I want something specific in someone's experience, I often introduce it essentially off camera. It's a bit like if it was a film, having it so you've just got that very subtle sound of a stream somewhere in the background with no one ever acknowledging it or talking about it, that the person subconsciously kind of picks up on, so that when you start seeing it, it makes sense that it was there and you don't feel like it was jarring because it's been introduced in that subtle kind of, it's in the experience, it's just not in your awareness right now. We're just going to get to it, and it's going to be about discovery. And it's the same with therapy. It's, I will say things like, with hypnosis, I wonder which hand will lift up, instead of telling you which hand will lift up, because it might not, I might be wrong. I remember there's a therapist called Ernest Rossi. He passed away, I think 2020. He did a video during, he was teaching a course on his form of therapy. During this therapy, he did something he doesn't normally do. He was very direct, and he said, you can notice those hands coming together. And the client looked up at him and said, I can feel my hands moving apart. And so he then went with that and obviously said, or maybe they're moving apart as you go deeper. And so he then just went with it. But when he got to the talking to the audience afterwards about, what was going on, he said, and that's why I never tell people what to do. Whenever I tell people what to do, they go and do the opposite. So don't even tell people, I made the mistake of telling him what to do and it wasn't right. Whereas if I had just gone with it and said, I wonder what movement you're going to have in those hands, that would have been the right thing, because they can have their own movement. But by him telling the guy what movement had to be there, he was then wrong. And when you're doing something like therapy, you're always trying never to be wrong. You're always trying to say things that don't take someone out of the experience.
That's very interesting. Well, if you have a hypnosis that you think would be appropriate to tack on to this, that'd be very much appreciated. And if it's one that's already uploaded, maybe we can just rip one of your YouTube videos and put it towards the end of this, whatever you want. And I'll come back on and do a little solo intro for that after we close off here, based on whatever it is that you want to do. So I guess last thing is, where can people find you and where can they learn more? I know you have several books. I wanted to talk to you about some of your books, but we're running up on time here, so maybe we'll have to do this again. But
I'm always happy to keep talking, but if you're busy.
No, unfortunately, I do have to get going here. I had a hard stop. I have to be somewhere in 30 minutes. So, so where can people find your books? Where can people find your hypnosis, your videos? And yeah.
The easiest thing, so the videos, I've got Dan Jones Hypnosis as a YouTube channel. It's Dan Jones Hypnosis, meditations and sleep stories or something like that. But Dan Jones Hypnosis, you'll find it all. I've also got a channel I run with a neuroscientist, Dr. David Lewis, called The Mind Changers. I've got a second sleep story channel because I do two different types of sleep stories, which is just Dan Jones Slumberland, I think. Obviously, I'm in other places. I'm HypnoDan UK on TikTok. I'm on Instagram as, I think, HypnoDan. It annoys me that there's a HypnoDan on TikTok who's got 2 subscribers. And so I can't be HypnoDan. I've always been HypnoDan everywhere. And obviously I'm on Facebook and things, but I don't really use them very often. So the main place I can be found is on YouTube. That's sort of the main thing I do. And then obviously all the links to my books and things, I've got a website, danjoneshypnosis.com, and on there's literally links to everything. So all the current books that I've got available for sale are on there, which are around autism, mental health, hypnosis, sleep stories, things like that. My e-courses, I've got like 15 e-courses that you can click through to from the website. Obviously the YouTube stuff, all sorts of other bits and pieces.
Awesome. Well, I hope people check it out. We'll have to do a part 2 at some point because this was a really fun conversation. I feel like I learned a lot. I'm going to go back and sort of take notes on this. And I know that I'm going to, see how trippy some of these time distortion meditations are. If you have any up, or maybe I'll go find some.
Well, the hardest thing is to not be doing things to you during an interview. My wife constantly spends her time slapping the side of me because I do it instinctively and automatically without paying any attention to what I'm doing. I just go straight into hypno mode and start hypnotizing her. Whenever I'm watching someone and watching their behaviors, I'm always kind of, don't say anything, don't respond to it, don't start. They've acknowledged they'd like this outcome. Don't starting to subtly influence them to have that outcome. So I've had to sit here trying not to.
What might be fun? So typically what Alex and I do is we're going to be launching a Patreon soon, or a paid Substack, some kind of paywall. And usually what we would do is, let's say I interview you, we have our 90 minutes that goes out to the public, and then Alex and I would do 30 minutes on our own 4-game takeaways from that, because we don't want to ram 4 games down everyone's throat. So we'll kind of save it for the people who are super into it. Would you? I think it would be really fun, and I'm hyping it up now, because if you say yes, now we can sell the paywall. But I would be very open to you hypnotizing me on camera for the paywall people, if you're down for that.
Yeah, I would do that.
Awesome. All right, then I'll reach out and we'll schedule that. But I do have to go today.
Yep.
Everyone, check out Dan. Check out the Substack and Patreon, so you can watch me get hypnotized. I don't know what's gonna happen. And Dan, thank you so much for coming on. And everyone, remember, think simple, have fun, and get stuff done.
So think about what it is that you want to achieve. Think about what you'll be doing, how you'll be thinking, what sort of things you'll be saying, and what you'll be saying to yourself, how you'll feel when you've achieved what you want to achieve. So you want to give all of that a lot of thought. Really try and absorb yourself in the idea of having achieved your goal, having achieved what it is that you really want to gain from this experience. What will others notice? So how will others know that you've achieved what it is that you want to achieve? What will be the first kind of thing that they perhaps notice? Are there changes to your environment? Perhaps there are things that today you've got in your environment that when you achieve your goal, those aspects of your environment will be different. Maybe there are things added to your environment that perhaps don't exist currently. Think about how you'll ideally be responding to different types of situations in the future, in line with that goal that you hope to achieve. And just check that what it is that you hope to achieve aligns with who you are, how you are, and who you want to be. Does it align with you as a being and with your values? And then, if necessary, make any adjustments. So make any changes to help it to align with who you want to be as a being and with your values and how you want to represent yourself. So that it's congruent. What you want is to make sure that the goal that you achieve is in line with who you are and who you want to be, is in line with your values. So make any changes, perhaps, if you need to. And then again, just run through, what will you be doing when you've achieved that? How will life be different? What will you do? What will you see? What will you hear? What will you feel? What kind of internal dialogue will you have? So run through all that again And just keep running through that a few times, just making any adjustments if you need to, because it's important that the goal that you strive to achieve is congruent with who you are. If it mismatches with who you are, so if somebody was trying to achieve a certain bit of success, but in doing so they were neglecting their family, then that'll make it very difficult, because the goal isn't in harmony with something that's an important value for you as a being. So you just want to make sure that your goal is in harmony with who you want to be and who you are as a person. And now what I want you to do is think about what situations you currently respond in an unhelpful way in. So what you're looking for is, what are those mid-game kind of real-world situations that you find yourself in where currently you end up responding in an unhelpful way, but you'd rather respond in a new, more helpful way of being. Think about what those triggers are. What do you see? What do you hear in that experience? What's happening in that environment? And now what we're going to do is we're going to start placing things into boxes. So we're going to have you imagine 4 boxes in your mind. So you'll have a box on the left, and then a box next to that, and then a box next to that one, and a box on the end, on the far right. And the process we're going to go through will have you go from focusing on that first box, and that first box is going to have what you've just thought about. It's going to have that trigger, that kind of the environmental situation that when it happens external from who you are, your short game response to that is currently an unhelpful short game response. So you have that environmental trigger in the first box, and there may be multiple triggers. And so all of that, you just have a representation of that in that first box. If there's one clear type of example that happens, or one clear aspect of a situation, then you can focus on that as being in the first box. So the idea is we're just creating a connection with these boxes to end up being able to break the old pattern, the old way of responding, before we replace it with your new desired way of responding. So in the second box, what I want you to do is imagine the absolute worst case scenario. So it doesn't have to be one that is highly likely to happen. So it's not the likeliest scenario, it's the worst case scenario. The worst case kind of outcome that could happen if you continue to respond in that old way that's triggered by box 1. So when box 1 happens, you respond currently in a specific kind of way, the way that you're trying to change. And there will be a worst case scenario of what could happen. So again, think about what you would see, what you would hear, what you would potentially feel, what your internal dialogue would be. Think about all the aspects of that worst case scenario. Is there an impact on others, for example, in that worst case scenario? So give that some thought about what the worst case scenario of responding in the unhelpful way to what's in box 1. And then in box 3, just imagine the word no, or some other way of representing that sense of, I do not want that, that will not happen, I do not accept that. That kind of sense of that strength, whatever it is for you, whatever language you use to represent that. So, for example, I worked with an alcoholic where for them, their response in box 3 was, I don't drink. So box 1 was the triggers, the things that, like seeing alcohol, seeing a reference to alcohol, etc., or having certain life events. That would all be in box 1. Box 2 would be the worst case scenario if they gave in and had that alcohol. Box 3 was them essentially dismissing, saying, that future isn't something that's ever going to happen in my life. I do not accept that as part of my future. So for them, it was, I don't drink. They were firm about that statement. That was the statement that worked for them. So you want something that represents that, some no, back to box 2, some kind of strong sense of what's in box 2, I do not accept. I will not have that as an outcome. I do not want that in my future. So you want whatever words represent that. So for me, it's normally just no. It's a very blunt, very firm negative. I am not having that as an outcome in my life. And then in box 4, the one over on the right, what you want is the best case scenario of not responding in the old way and instead choosing to respond in your new way. So you've said no to that old way of responding. And instead, you're going to be focused on having this outcome. And think about that best case outcome. So it's going to be along the lines of the goal that we set up at the very beginning. So you want that best case kind of, this is the sort of thoughts I'm going to have. These are the feelings I'm going to have. These are the behaviors I'm going to be doing. This is how I'm going to be talking to myself. This is what my internal dialogue is going to be. The sort of words I'm going to say to myself. This is how I'm going to say the internal dialogue to myself. This is what others are going to notice, that lets them know I've achieved this best case outcome. So what we're doing with this process is we're breaking down the old way of responding, the unhelpful way of responding. We're breaking down that old short game response to the mid-game kind of environment around you, to what's happening external from yourself, those sort of triggers, things that you see. So, for example, if you wanted to exercise more, then perhaps when you see, oh, it's time for me to exercise, you currently end up perhaps coming up with excuses or thinking, oh, but I don't feel like it, or however you respond. And then there'll be a worst case scenario of continuing to respond in that way. So you say no to all of that, and you open yourself up to the possibility of having this positive future instead. And so we're trying to just break down and knock down that old way of responding while beginning to replace it with this new way of responding. And so to do this, we're going to go through these 4 boxes, but we're going to go through them quickly and then we're going to get faster. So you only have to have a sense of this. And I'm just going to end up reaching a point of saying box 1, 2, 3, and 4 so that we get through it even quicker. But what you want is box 1 is the trigger, is something happening in your life. Box 2 is the worst case outcome of continuing to respond in the old unhelpful way. Box 3 is your assertion, no, I'm not going to have that future. That's not part of my future at all. And then box 4 is the best case scenario of not responding in that old way, and so instead being able to respond in your new way. And we're going to go through this a number of times. And what we're going to do is go through box 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're going to have your eyes shut while you do this. And then I'm going to ask you to open your eyes after you've done box 4, and then close your eyes. And I'm going to tell you to close your eyes almost straight away. And then we'll do box 1, 2, 3, and 4 again. And we're going to do that about 5 or 6 times. And the idea is that this breaks that old way of responding while setting up a new way of responding. And then after the last time, your eyes will remain shut. And then we'll move in to the final stage of this process. So make sure that you're comfortable. Make sure you don't have to pay your attention to anything else. You can just pay your attention to this. Make sure that you won't be disturbed. And then allow your eyes to close. And just focus on box 1, on that kind of trigger, on the environment that happens that makes you suddenly start responding in a certain way. And then focus on box 2, that worst case scenario of having responded in an unhelpful way to box 1. And then focus on box 3, that no, that assertion that you don't accept box 2. You don't accept that as a part of your future reality. And then focus on box 4, that best case scenario, that best outcome of responding in a helpful way in line with your goal. And then open your eyes, then close your eyes. And then focus on box 1. And then on box 2. And then on box 3, saying no. And then on box 4. And then open your eyes and close your eyes. And then focus on box 1. And then on box 2. And then on box 3. And then on box 4. And then open your eyes and close your eyes. And then focus on box 1. And then focus on box 2. Then focus on box 3. And then focus on box 4. Then open your eyes, then close your eyes. Then focus on box 1. Focus on box 2. Focus on box 3, saying no, and then focusing on box 4. Then open your eyes and close your eyes. And then focusing on box 1. Focusing on box 2. Focusing on box 3. And focusing on box 4. Then open your eyes and then closing your eyes. And this time, allow yourself to imagine sitting down in the most comfortable of chairs. And as you imagine yourself sitting down in that incredibly comfortable chair, imagine a screen in front of you. And it's a giant blank screen at the moment. And imagine on that screen is forming one of those situations where this time you respond in a helpful way. And imagine yourself responding in that helpful way, responding in your desired way, carrying out what it is you want to achieve. Notice what you can see as you watch yourself achieving that on the screen. Notice what you can hear about yourself, and perhaps what you can hear in the environment. Noticing what behaviors you're doing. Perhaps noticing how others are interacting with you differently. Just really paying attention to how you know that you on that screen is responding how you want to respond. And as you go through this process, you can make any tweaks that you need to make it just right, just how you want it to be. Ensuring that this is congruent with who you are as a being, with your values. Making sure that it aligns with those values, with your being, making all those necessary changes, and just seeing that play out. Notice how that screen moves forward to another future point where you again are responding in that desired way. Noticing what you can see, what you can hear. What happens that lets you know that you're responding just as you wish in that situation, automatically, easily and effortlessly, always keeping this in mind. And then moving forward even further to another future situation. Just allowing one to come to mind on that screen, where again you respond in that desired way. Doing that automatically, easily, effortlessly,
noticing what you can see, hear, noticing how others know that you're responding in that desired way, perhaps noticing changes within yourself that lets you know you're making progress as these situations go on, responding in that desired way across a period of time. And as you continue to watch yourself automatically responding in that desired way from one situation to the next, just allow that screen to move on to another situation and then another, each time seeing yourself growing, developing, and getting closer to that overall goal that you're aiming for. All the way off to a point way off in the future, long after you've already passed your desired goal, and looking back on that and seeing that you, what you look like, how you know that that you on that screen has achieved that desired goal, has been living having achieved that desired goal for some time. What do you see? What do you hear? What do others perhaps notice? Is there an impact on others because you have achieved that goal? How has life been for that you on the screen, having achieved the goal? Just take some time to absorb yourself in all the ideas around that, where you are automatically, instinctively responding easily and effortlessly in that desired way, and have now been for some time. And then have a sense of the screen going blank again. And then as an image appears on the screen, it starts at the beginning again, only this time you stand up out of that chair, you walk to the screen and you step into that screen, you step into the you in that screen. And standing in the you in the screen, you go through these situations again. So go through that first situation. Notice what you can see, what you can hear, but this time you can notice what you can feel, how things feel as you go through this situation. What emotions do you have as you respond in the desired way? What's your internal dialogue? How do you talk to yourself? How do you express that internal dialogue? What kinds of words do you use? What do you notice about others around you, perhaps? And just experience this you responding in this desired way. And you can discover that if you find yourself in a trigger situation, in one of these kind of situations, you automatically and instinctively respond in this desired way. Easily, effortlessly, instinctively, and you can always keep that in mind. As you progress and notice the movie changing and find yourself in that second situation, and again going through that, seeing what you will see, hearing what you will hear, feeling what you will feel, doing what you'll be doing, having the internal dialogue that you'll have, going through that situation in the desired way. So easily, so effortlessly. And then moving through that to a third situation. Again, experiencing what it's like to respond in a desired way. And you're working your way through all these situations, responding in this new way. All the way to that time in the future where you look back, having long achieved what it is you aim to achieve. And you're looking back at the progress you've made. And as you look back, having responded in the desired way now for some time, notice what you see, what you hear, how you feel. Perhaps any changes within you as a being. What internal dialogue you have, what sort of things you say to yourself and how you say those things. Perhaps the impact on others. Just going through all of that, but now from being in it and experiencing it, living it, as if you have achieved that now. Seeing what you will see, hearing what you will hear, feeling what you will feel, having the internal dialogue that you'll have, doing the behaviours that you will do. Always aware that you so easily and instinctively, anytime you're in one of those trigger situations, respond in the desired way, automatically, effortlessly. And just take a moment to notice what you can that lets you know that you have been successful and that you have been successful for a long period of time, behaving in this new desired way. And then begin to relax yourself a little more as you step out of that you in that screen and head back over to that comfortable chair. Relax yourself back down into the chair. Notice how you can relax deeper and even more comfortably. And while you relax even more comfortably, making all the necessary changes here and now, knowing that you can always come back to this and do some further work in the future following this process, allowing it to help you deeper and more fully with every use. You can find yourself almost drifting into a bit of a reverie in that chair, your mind wandering perhaps as you relax. And I'd like to just have you say to yourself 3 times, if I find myself in a trigger situation, then I'll automatically respond in my desired way. If I find myself in a trigger situation, then I'll automatically respond in the desired way. If I find myself in a trigger situation, then I'll automatically respond in the desired way. That's it. And then, when you've finished doing this inner work, and you can take some time to relax further first, and allow the mind to just continue to update your neurology with the changes that you're making here. And then once you know you've done the inner work you're going to do here today, you can find yourself drifting peacefully and comfortably asleep. Or allow yourself to awaken, feeling refreshed and revitalized in your own time, knowing that you can use this process frequently as required,